Hi, I'm Sapan Ghai, Chief Commercial Officer of Sovereign Metals Limited, which is listed on the ASX and AIM. We are developing the Kasiya rutile graphite deposit in Malawi, which is the world's largest rutile deposit and one of the world's largest graphite deposits.
Well, I think that's the topic of the day, which I want to talk to you about, if you don't mind. But first of all, Sapan, we're joined today by Frank. So we're going to leap to him. Frank, how are you? And congratulations and welcome to the team.
Thank you, Matthew. Thanks, Sapan, for making the introduction of Sovereign. So I joined officially on Friday last week. So the feet not quite settled under the desk, but at least I have been in country since December last year. So 10, 11 months of on-the-ground experience and getting to know, the lay of the land, so to speak, in Malawi.
Right, okay. Well, look, guys, the reason I got you on this call is because news out of China suggests that they don't want to share anymore. Graphite is something that they value, something that they want and they need for their own demand. So what does the West do about that? I mean, Sapan, just on the macro side of things, how do you view that statement out of China?
Oh, look, 93% of all anode material comes out of China. You put a stop to that, or even if you bottleneck it, it's going to have a big impact into the Western world. We were looking at something like 46% increase in graphite in the Western world going into anode material. Now, all of a sudden, you're looking at everything on this, this side, ex-China, all ending up going towards the anode market, just to make up a fraction of where electric vehicles and lithium-ion battery demand is probably going to get to.
Right. Okay. So remind me what you've got in terms of the graphite component. We'll stay away from rutile today. We know you've got what's largest deposits there, but let's stick with the graphite. What have you got? Remind us.
So look, one of the largest graphite deposits in the world. It's a huge resource. Well over 20 million tons of flake graphite in the ground that will be mining as I hate to say byproduct, because it's actually about half of our revenue now after the PFS came out. But we're probably the only mine out there where graphite is a co-product rather than the main and only material within the mine. But we're looking at producing, off the back of our PFS numbers, something like 220,000 tons of 240,000 tons of flake graphite for 25 years, and that only mines 30% of our resource so far. In terms of revenue, that's about $8 billion of revenue over that initial life of mine, and that's based on very conservative price estimates for our graphite basket.
Right, and just sticking with you, Sapan, on the macro before I get to Frank, is what do you think this announcement out of China does to obviously 93%, big number, but what do you think that's going to do for pricing? Are we going to see bifurcation of pricing in the marketplace? Are we going to see people like they've done in lithium and other battery metals kind of moving upstream to kind of capture and secure a supply for the next 5, 10, 15 years? What do you think the reaction is going to be?
Yeah, totally. Look, there's it's no surprise that graphite, natural graphite specifically, has always been on the critical minerals list for the EU, for the US. It's part of the Japan-US trade agreement backed by the Inflation Reduction Act. When we were looking at pricing our own basket for the PFS, we went to one specific commodities forecasting house, which has a very good understanding of where the market is going for battery minerals. And they came back and told us that our graphite basket should be priced at around just under $2,700 a ton. Now, when you compare that to where the peers have been putting their basket prices in their studies over the last few years, you're talking anywhere between $1,400 to $1,800. So already we're talking a premium product. Given that we're all ex-investment bankers, ex-accountants, and prudent engineers, we decided to be as conservative as possible. And actually, we went with a price of about 1,290. So that's way below any of the peers and a huge haircut to where the actual experts are saying our prices would be. Given the news out of China, there's no doubt that our price is going to start pushing up towards that price provided by the experts.
Right, so real game changer here. So Frank, for you, let's start a little bit back. So give people a bit of background on who you are, what you've done, and what you've been brought in to try to do.
Sure, Matthew, thanks. So I've been working in neighboring countries, to Malawi, DRC, Mozambique, Zambia, over the last 20 years, really focusing on project development, feasibility of projects, definitive studies. I spent a lot of time in China looking to raise capital for a vanadium and steel project in Mozambique. So really, have a decent understanding of certainly what, China is all about and Chinese investors. And I think it's interesting that, this project essentially from a geopolitics or political perspective is moving away from China. And I guess, what Sapan is mentioning here is the fundamentals of this project is solid, it's strong. We've used conservative, pricing forecasts. But this news out of China really puts Kasiya on the map as, the second largest graphite resource or deposit on the planet. It's going to become, or undoubtedly will become, one of the key sources of long-term strategic or secure strategic supply of graphite. And I think it's something which we really need people. Well, I think people will soon realize that. And given the strong fundamentals, the low operating cost, there's no doubt that we will displace a lot of the synthetic stuff coming out of China, not coming out of China anymore because of these curbs or the restrictions that they're putting on it. I think it really adds to our story. It's something we want the market to understand, and the fundamentals ultimately speaks for itself.
But come back to the final bit of my question, which was like, what you've been brought on to do, because obviously it's not as Sapan says, it's not a byproduct, it's a secondary product or revenue stream, quite frankly, here, which now has just almost could you usurp the kind of the excitement around the rutile component. I mean, the rutile is why Rio came in. They came in for a big chunk of money, and because it's a serious deposit. But the pricing in the West is going to be affected. The thinking in terms of getting certainty around supply in a market which has just been, quite frankly, just almost shut down by the Chinese, it's gonna just change the landscape somewhat. So come back to what you've been brought in to specifically do, and how do things change given this news? I know you two days with feet barely under the table, but what have you been talking about this weekend?
Look, I mean, there's the rugby, of course.
Far from that. Stop it. Okay.
Look, there's the fundamentals are strong. We've done the PFS. This news changes a lot for us in terms of the focus, I guess, of what the project will ultimately or can deliver. Yes, graphite is now, coming out of the PFS, 52% of our revenues. So it's as a byproduct or a secondary product or a co-product, whatever you want to call it. But the project still needs to we still need to progress it towards permitting. We still need to demonstrate that, the PFS can be converted into a definitive study, which ultimately can be financed. So there's a lot of work in country that needs to be done in terms of, getting the government, bringing the government alongside us or along with us. This is a project of scale that Malawi has never seen. Many countries have never seen projects of this scale. So all of those steps still needs to be taken. So my role really is, and have been over the last 10 months, have been to, establish the relationship with the government. And the intention would be to, move that along, ramp it up alongside our technical team that we've appointed to make sure that we tick the boxes. We can talk about the graphite market, but we still have to deliver the project. We still have to deliver, the test work that goes alongside We still have to, move along through the process and ultimately get to where we want to be, from a local government perspective, technical elements.
So Sapan, obviously, you heard what Frank says there. It's obviously there's a process to be got through and a process to be done, and that just takes time. You kind of accelerated the process through to now, in 4 short years, which is good. But what does the market need to recognize in terms of not just what this exciting news are regarding graphite is, in terms of your ability to get into production? Is Rio causing some, I guess, uncertainty in the market? What is it that they're trying to do? What are their expectations? What should the market's expectations be of that relationship?
Yeah, look, so Rio clearly came in interested in the rutile. Why wouldn't they be? First rutile find in 50, 60 years of its size. Rio produced about 1.2 million tons of titania slag out of South Africa and out of Quebec. So us finding what could be one of the biggest disruptors in that environment, in the titanium space, obviously piqued their interest. And then as they got to know us better, and as they got to know graphite, at the same time they were building out a battery minerals division themselves. That's now up and running. They've signed OEMs. They've signed MOUs with a bunch of OEMs out there, including BMW, Ford, Volvo. These are all names where they want to provide low carbon materials and battery minerals into that space. And look, next month there'll be a Rio lab up and running where they'll be building their own batteries in Melbourne. So given that backdrop, you can understand exactly why someone like Rio, who only really goes and invests in and looks for those tier one world-class assets that are really going to move the needle for a blue chip company of that size, why they thought it was a good idea to put $40 million into play for an initial 15%, and another $18 million of options ready and waiting to come in over the next 10 months to fund our DFS. And we're doing that DFS aligned with Rio Tinto. So the way I see it is the PFS that came out was almost, the end of the beginning. It was like Sovereign 1.0, a standalone junior ASX AIM-listed company. And now you're moving into Sovereign 2.0, which is, this developer that's sitting alongside Rio Tinto with this huge project and bringing that project into fruition and development over the coming months and years into markets that are obviously piquing everyone's interest right now.
True. Okay. Well, so Sovereign Metals 2.0 with Rio there is, I guess, on paper really, really good. But there's a little bit of doubt in people's minds as to, what their intent is and what the upside is, quite frankly. Is this an exclusive arrangement? Can other strategics come in, or is the door shut?
Well, according to the investment agreement, which is all, public, Rio have preemptive rights or pro rata rights on any future equity. They have exclusivity over 40% of the production coming out of Kasiya. Now, importantly, they have this option to become operator. And that option lapses 180 days post us announcing the DFS, which we're doing in conjunction with Rio. So 180 days after the DFS, if Rio decides not to be operator, bearing in mind they don't tend to operate mines on behalf of juniors as a business model, so read into that what you will, they essentially lose all their rights and just become shareholder like anyone else.
Right. Okay. But again, if I'm looking at this as a shareholder or quite frankly, an investor looking into this thing, what's the possible upside? In a scenario, in one sort of scenario, you think, well, maybe you guys get taken out for some derisory premium, 20, 30%. in which case that's what I'm in for. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. That's a nice uplift, better than having money in the bank. But in terms of how do you drive that valuation and that value along the phases, as it were? Because if I look at the market, since this graphite announcement's made, there's a few, obviously, smaller companies than yourself in the space. It's in a nice sort of bounce and reaction in terms of their share price. And hopefully that lasts and sustains because, we need graphite. We need all the graphite. And yours hasn't. You've been fairly flat there. So what do you think is holding people back from, buying into what you've got here?
It's a good question. And if we knew the exact answer, we wouldn't be at these prices. Look, I'm not going to get into true, intrinsic values of what our shares should be and where they should be trading. Simply going to put it out there that, if you are holding the world's largest rutile deposit, which feeds into titanium, which is in itself a critical mineral. I mean, even Apple's making phones out of titanium now. Alongside the rutile, you're getting this graphite out the ground that feeds into the lithium-ion battery space. And you could be the largest producer, the lowest cost producer of both those materials, and the lowest CO2 impact, which, for us is nice to have, but for those higher up in the supply chain is almost essential now. Should we be sat at around 8-9% of our NPV based on mining just 30% of this project? Probably not is the answer. But look, those are the key highlights, and maybe some investors are not well attuned to Malawi because Malawi's mining space is still up and coming. They've only really built one mine in the last kind of decade or so. But look what happened when we did the deal with Rio Tinto. The Ministry of Mines put out a press statement saying how they welcome Rio's investments, how they wish that other investors, blue chip companies, emulate Rio's investment and inwardly invest into Malawi. The president, His Excellency himself, has been around seeing the likes of Joe Biden being in the UK as part of the UK Malawi Chamber of Commerce meetings and saying, look, there's three pillars to Malawi's economic development: agriculture, tourism, and mining. And all three require a lot of private investment going in there.
Right. Okay. Now, it's literally was going to be my next question is, in terms of the jurisdictional component, how people view that. I think you're probably talking about Kalicara as the I think Lotus Energies project. Is but I think they would say the same thing. They would argue the same thing. That's actually a pretty good place to do mining. Well, look, I think in terms of what I've got from this conversation, is that you recognise the importance of the graphite, but you also, I guess, slightly frustrated by the kind of response from the marketplace more broadly in terms of where you're at. Do you think that you could have presented the PFS figures slightly more aggressively? I get the conservative approach, and that's probably welcomed by people like Rio Tinto, but the market more broadly probably needs a little bit of help with doing those numbers.
Look, are they going back to my analogy of Sovereign 1.0 and 2.0? Sovereign 1.0 as a standalone ASX junior, if I turned up on this interview and said, if I spend $2 billion on Kasiya, the NPV is this, and it'll last 100 years, and I could corner the entire graphite space, the titanium space, you'd probably sit there and go, but why are you worth what you are? I mean, you're asking that even with these conservative figures. So there's, I guess there's your answer. I could not credibly, and I don't think Frank could credibly come up as a junior and tell you that we could raise $2 billion by ourselves to build what should be, a tier one multi-generational mine producing two critical minerals. Whereas now we're building out the team. We've got Rio on board. We don't need cash. We're just getting things done. The government's on side. Looks like the macros with the commodities are on side as well. So let's just wait to see what we can do.
Right, Frank, just finish off with you. So obviously, we were chatting to Sapan about his views on the macro today. In terms of operationally on the ground, I know you're advancing relationships in country in terms of what you're seeing out there in terms of that kind of build environment, the costs. We've seen inflation, knocking some of these studies out of the water. Yours is fresh, out of the can, as it were. Your PFS. How do you see your ability to actually get things done in country? I mean, you're going to need licenses and permits and consensus and a lot of luck along the way. One suspects with mining at the moment. So, you confident?
Yes. Look, it's a new young mining sector in Malawi. They haven't had much experience in the space. I think what helps with Rio is that it brings some credibility to the sector, some new focus from the government side. Up until 4 or 5 years ago, the Mines Department or Mines Ministry was a department of natural resources. So there's a lot of capacity that needs to be built. The will is there from their side. Unprecedented, they've established a technical committee upon our request earlier this year, specifically to work with us to help fast track permitting. Unlike other countries or other, where I've worked in the past, the doors were generally always shut to us or to me if we wanted to have a meeting with the minister or the mines department or finance, justice or lands. It's very different in Malawi. It's the government is friendly, welcoming. They really see the mining sector and our Kasiya project specifically as something which is going to make a difference to the economic situation, the socioeconomic situation. So there's a lot of goodwill coming from their side, and they want to fast track things. Nobody wants to stand in the way or be responsible for delaying anything. So I think it's a very positive experience so far, and I think it's the welcome that Rio has received from the government has also been unprecedented. So I think they are quite happy and impressed with what they've seen. So yes, I think we do feel confident that we're going to get these things over the line. And again, it's a project of scale which they haven't seen yet. So there's a lot of assistance from the government that's going to be required. But gladly, it's a positive experience so far.
Okay, and remind me the delivery or the date, the timing that you're aiming for on the DFS is what, Frank?
So timing-wise, I think there's quite a bit of work that needs to happen now in terms of optimizing the PFS, getting everybody settled, the technical guys settled, getting the Rio Tinto technical committee constituted, having them review the PFS, getting comfortable. So I'm expecting that process to take about 6 months. And ultimately, a few things need to fall into place. I think for us to get a DFS done where we can make a final investment decision, some of the permits will have to be in place and some of the definitive agreements will have to be drafted. So target-wise, I'm hoping to be in a position where we can make a final investment decision towards the end of 2025. That's more or less what I'm hoping to achieve. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Frank, lovely to meet you. Sapan, great to see you as always. And stay in touch, guys, okay?
Will do. Thanks, Matthew.
And you. Thanks.